The musicians hired in Genoa by Captain Lubert were mediocre. The emperor had heard them in Longan when they arrived and was not pleased with them. An excellent artist from Milan, Gavadiano, who had spontaneously come to offer his talents to the emperor, was named conductor, and as the basic elements were good, he turned them into an excellent band that accompanied the Elban battalion to Paris. Gavadiano was then named head of the guard band and also worked in the chapel. It was a just reward for his disinterestedness and his love for the emperor. Captain Lubert's mission in going to Genoa was also to show off the brig and the Elban colors. It was manned by 50 grenadiers in fine uniform who greatly impressed the population when they went ashore. All wanted to see them and host them. Glory was written on their tanned faces, and they were the object of everyone's admiration. They resisted the extended invitations, spoke of the emperor with enthusiasm, and returned on board ship after behaving with admirable wisdom. Cipriani, one of the emperor's butlers, went along also. He had been secretly sent to thank several tradesmen of his acquaintance who had offered the emperor their services and any money he might need. Some furniture was purchased to better cover up the purpose of this mission. When the brig returned, the emperor went on board and chatted with his old soldiers, who were all happy to see him and delighted by the Genoa furlough. He inquired whether they had been well treated during the crossing. One of them, a wine lover nicknamed La Comète, replied, "Sire, that was quite a party." "Any complaints? You didn't lack for wine, judging by your color." "That's only a sunburn, sire. But the finest thing on me is this," pointing at the eagle badge on his cap. "It has never faced the rear." The emperor left the ship, and when he got home that evening, was still laughing about the witty quips of his old grognard, who a few months later would die at Waterloo, repeating the words of his leader, "The guard may die, but it never surrenders." In July, Countess Bertrand arrived in Portoferrajo with her children, accompanied by the general's brother. The lady was pregnant and gave birth in August to a boy, who died in October because of a deplorable error by the pharmacist. Understanding such legitimate sorrow, the emperor would often visit her with words of friendship and encouragement to ease her pain. It was he and Empress Josephine who had brought about the marriage of the lady to General Bertrand, for whom the emperor had much esteem and affection. He gave them each a dowry with the generosity the emperor brought to all he did. 200,000 francs to the countess, 50,000 francs in diamonds, 30,000 francs for her trousseau, 200,000 francs to Count Bertrand, and the La Jonquière villa. Such was the couple's dowry. These details were given me by the countess herself, who liked to relate the emperor's kindness towards her. Countess Bertrand had brought with her the Fontainebleau Treaty, which was burned along with other papers when the emperor left Elba. This lady had charming conversation, an elegant figure, and charming feet, although not beautiful. Her appearance was pleasant. Her entire person was imbued with a distinction which her children inherited. Madame Mare's arrival had brought the emperor back to Portoferrajo. After spending a few weeks there, he returned on August 20th to La Madonna, and Madame came to stay in a small house in Marciana. The emperor dined every day at her house and received a few people from the city there, returning in the evening to his hermitage. His Majesty had been there a few days when Madame Walewska, who was going to Naples, asked his permission to stop and see him on the way. Having been granted permission to do so, she came with her son, sister, and brother. She remained 24 hours at the hermitage and did not go to Marciana, where Madame Mare was staying. On the island, people thought it was the Empress and the King of Rome and became excited. The Emperor had gone to meet her with Paoli, the gendarmerie captain, and Bernardi, one of his aides-de-camp, followed by two Mamelukes. Bernardi got off his horse, and when they met, the two ladies picked up the child and carried him to the hermitage, allowing no one else to the honor of carrying the presumed King of Rome. He was certainly 2 years older, but the beauty of his features and the curly blonde hair flowing over his shoulders made him look very much like Isabel's portrait of the King of Rome. The rumor had spread throughout Portoferrajo, and Dr. Ferro, whom the emperor had not taken with him, went to see General Drouot to ask him if it might not be a good idea to come and offer his services to the empress. The next day at dawn, he was at the Hermitage. The emperor had turned over the 3 small rooms he occupied to the 2 ladies. Beds had been set up, and he had taken refuge for the night in a tent erected a distance away under some chestnut trees. Saint-Denis and I slept in the walls of the tent. I was there. It was there that Dr. Ferro found me. Surprised to see him, I asked what brought him there. When he promptly congratulated me on the pleasure I must be feeling at seeing my mother, I understood his mistake, and without having time to correct it, went in to see the emperor, who was calling for me. I mentioned this to the emperor, who had a good laugh. When the emperor was dressed, he came out of his tent, where he had spent a rather poor night. A heavy rain with much wind had prevented him from sleeping, but sunshine announced a fine day and had already dried up the surrounding area. He found Madame Walewska's child playing, called to him, sat on a chair he had asked me to bring, and put him on his knees, then called for the doctor, who was strolling in the vicinity. When he had arrived, he asked, "Well, Ferro, how do you find him?" "But, sire, I think the king has grown a lot." The child was 2 years older than the young Napoleon, but had the same kind of face. The emperor laughed heartily over the doctor's mistake, teased him a few moments, and thanked him for his eagerness to come and offer his services. The emperor had no household staff with him to serve his guests. Lunch was brought all prepared for Marciana, as was dinner. If there was a shortage of luxury at the table, there was plenty of mirth. The emperor wanted the child, who had not lunched with him, to have dinner there. Madame Walewska said he was far too unruly, but His Majesty was not surprised by children's mischievousness. He claimed to have been very stubborn and unruly himself, saying, "I would hit Joseph and then force him to do my homework. If I was punished and put on plain bread, I went and swapped it for the shepherd's chestnut bread, or I would go find my nurse, who would give me some little squids I was quite fond of." "Sire," said Madame Walewska, "I believe that if these were offered to your Majesty, you would not like them as much." "Not at all. I would eat some with pleasure." The day was spent strolling through the area until dinner time, as the ladies were to sail out that same evening. The emperor placed Madame Walewska's son next to him. He was very good at first, but that didn't last. And as his mother was scolding him, the emperor said, "Aren't you afraid of the whip?" "Well, I urge you to be. I felt it only once, but I have remembered it always." He told how this had happened. "My grandmother was quite old and stooped, and seemed to me and to Pauline like an old fairy godmother. She walked with a cane, and her affection for us always led her to bring us candy. This didn't prevent us from walking behind her and mimicking her. Unfortunately, she noticed this and complained to Madame, telling her she was raising us without any respect for grandparents. Although she loved us very much, Madame put up with no nonsense, and I saw that I was in for it. Pauline got hers first because skirts are easier to pull up than pants are to unbutton and pull down. That evening, she tried to get me, but in vain. I thought I would get off scot-free. The next morning, she pushed me away when I tried to kiss her, but I had forgotten all about it when during the day Madame said to me, "Napoleon, you are invited to lunch at the governor's house. Go get dressed." I went upstairs, quite happy at the idea of lunching with officers, and got undressed rapidly, but Madame was like a cat waiting for a mouse. She suddenly entered my room, closing the door behind her. I realized the trap into which I had fallen, but it was too late. I had to submit to the spanking. And as the child had listened with great care, the emperor said to him, "Well, what do you think of that?" "But I don't make fun of Mama," he replied, with a contrite look on his face that pleased the emperor, who kissed him, saying, "That's a good answer." During the day, the gendarmerie captain told him he had just received a report that 2 soldiers in the Corsican regiment had exchanged blows with their swords. The emperor asked, "What was the cause?" "No doubt some whore." "Yes, sire." "Which man was wounded?" "The one who appears to be guilty, having insulted the woman whom the other was holding by the arm and wanted to appropriate her for himself." That's only just. Even the meekest animal will bite anyone who tries to take its food away from it. Madame Walewska, later Countess de Ornano, was a ravishing beauty at the time. The emperor knew her in Poland. She bore him a son, was always very devoted to him, and never failed the emperor in difficult times, either at Fontainebleau in 1814 or at Malmaison in 1815. At the time I am writing of, when she arrived in Elba, she had put on a little weight, without her waist showing it too much. An open and calm expression on her face revealed the sweetness of her character. Her sister, who was with her, appeared to be 18. She was slender, with the head of an angel. 2 days later, after their arrival, these ladies went back on board the ship that had brought them and sailed for Naples. The emperor accompanied them to the Marciana Marina and was most courteous. He said that in his day, men were far more amiable than they were today. Camp life had not made him cynical. In all matters relating to the fair sex, he used poetic expressions or words. The September rains drove the emperor from that residence to Langon, and Madame left Marciana to go to Porto Ferrajo. In Langon, the emperor lived in the upper part of town, which is a fort built on a rocky peak. The view from the emperor's apartments was admirable. Colonel Germanovsky was governor of the town and of the castle. As such, he came to greet the emperor and take him to his quarters, which were roomy and extensive, but totally devoid of furniture. The camp bed that accompanied the emperor was erected, a few chairs and a table made up from the bedroom furniture. Colonel Yermanovsky, as gracious as he was gallant and brave, was much liked by the townspeople, for whom he gave small parties and dinners. During the few weeks the emperor spent in that residence, he was always joined at table by the governor and a few town officials. The evening gatherings lasted until 10 p.m., at which time the emperor went home. 2 days before the departure from Langon, Princess's secretary, Monsieur Marie, brought the emperor a letter announcing her imminent arrival. The emperor's questions came so fast that the messenger was dumbfounded, asking the emperor to excuse him for his confusion of mind caused by the emotion of being in his presence. After allowing him to calm down, the emperor listened to him and told him to go wait for him in Porto Ferrajo, where he would be in a few days. During the emperor's stay in Marciana, a rumor circulated that General Brucelar, governor in Corsica for Louis XVIII, had sent an emissary to Algiers to induce the pirates to kidnap the emperor during one of the excursions when he left Porto Ferrajo and returned there by sea. Spotting one morning from his bedroom some small ships within sight of Porto Langon that he thought were Barbary ships, he asked me for his spyglass, rested it on my shoulder, and soon realized he was not mistaken. Their presence so close to his residence at that time, when such rumors were circulating, led him to order the brig Inconstant to set sail from Porto Ferrajo, where it was, and come drop anchor at Langon. As soon as it arrived, Captain Tayada, the bridge skipper, came to receive his orders. A note then addressed to Colonel Yermanovsky said this: Colonel, you shall take on board ship 1 officer, 1 sergeant, 4 corporals, and 24 men from the chasseurs battalion, being careful to select those who are not prone to seasickness. You shall also take 1 sergeant, 1 corporal, and 10 men from the commando battalion, with the same stipulations, and personally supervise the embarkment. Once the embarkment was completed, the brig sailed out immediately. The emperor kept it in sight for a long time, but the vessels vanished when they saw it, and the brig returned to port that evening. Madame Dargis also arrived at that residence from Prangan, a place 4 leagues from Geneva along the lake where King Joseph and his family lived. She brought letters from the king. She asked permission to remain on the island, and the emperor didn't know what to do, as she was without means. San Martino was being built, and the position of concierge was about to become available. She asked me to solicit that position for her, and the emperor granted it. This woman came from Nancy and was rather quixotic. She felt obliged to write me a poem to thank me for the position I had obtained for her. I read this to the emperor, who laughed over it, and after that, whenever he referred to her, he would call her my lunatic, although she was not that, but she had a mania for writing and expressing herself in rhyme. The various journeys made by the emperor had provided all the time required to complete the modifications to his residence. The princess's apartment, the ballroom, and the theater were finished. The emperor returned to Porto Ferrajo. A pretty garden had been planted and covered with sod, and flowers were growing everywhere. On his return, he had fine certificates handed out to a few grenadiers who were asking to go back to France. The emperor had been able to tally up his revenues and expenses since he had been on the island and felt the need to bring about some changes in his household. These were made in the food arrangements and a few salaries that were too high. Some messes were eliminated and replaced by allowances. Only his mess remained. I continued to have mine. This resulted in a substantial saving in the service. He was kind enough to tell me himself that he could now only give me 2,500 francs out of the 5,000 he used to give me. I told him it was much more than I needed, that 1,000 francs was more than sufficient for my needs. That evening at bedtime he told me, "You will make up the 5,000 francs out of my private purse." I tried to protest this, but he said, "That is my will."